Mpotsedu, can you hear me?
Yes, good evening. I can hear you.
Thank you very much for joining us. And for the record, Angelo, I did pick up my bottle cap. Let's get into the president's announcement. Ordinarily, the ANC would have waited until perhaps tomorrow or so when they do the normal post-Lekgotla press briefing. But this one, the president owned it, took it by himself, spoke to the nation late at night.
Well, let's first clarify that he spoke to us as the president of the African National Congress, because behind him were the flags of the party. And so he was communicating as president of the party what the party's decisions had been, and in that gesture also indicating that his government, as president of the Republic of South Africa, stood behind this. And it is that double whammy that I think people need to be very, very clear on. That Cyril Ramaphosa spoke tonight as president of the ANC and invoked his power as president of the Republic in order to do so, so that it does not seem as if there are two centers of power. What he did indicate was that the Secretary General, Ace Magashule, would make the announcement tomorrow with greater detail. And I think that's an anticipation from Cyril Ramaphosa that Ace Magashule might be seen as a divisive figure if he is the person to break the news, whereas if Cyril does it, it becomes something very different.
There are feelings, though, amongst analysts and observers who basically question President Ramaphosa's commitment to this particular policy of land expropriation without compensation, but he seems to be taking the bull by the horns.
Or he has been instructed by his party as president of the party to make that announcement. We must be very clear that this idea that Cyril Ramaphosa is on one trajectory and the ANC is on a different trajectory is to ignore the dynamics of the African National Congress. That he has an accountability measure that he has to make, that he has to do what it is that his party instructs him to do, and that his leadership is a leadership of consultation. And so out of the Lekgotla came these two specific ideas, one to balance out the other, the issue of land reform, and then the issue of economic empowerment. And Cyril Ramaphosa tasked in order to deliver this message was clearly this is a game that the ANC is playing at a very sophisticated level.
Now, what does it then say to Vincent Smith, who is currently running this process, which is supposed to inform the final decision, which has, in essence, just been made?
Well, we must listen very carefully to the language that Cyril Ramaphosa was using. He was suggesting that this would be done through the parliamentary process. This is not to suggest that you're only going to have a certain kind of process, but that the two processes would inform one another.
Then the economic emancipation aspect, whereby young people are supposed to be more skilled and more empowered. What did you make of that?
Well, again, I think that was meant to balance out the potential shocks that South Africans could have around this idea of land expropriation without compensation. It is the ANC's way of re-owning the agenda of land reformation away from the EFS. And it's also a way, I think, to send a signal to South Africa that the ANC is aware of the challenges in the economy and that it has the plan to address this. Let's not forget this is less than a year before general elections, and the ANC does want to go into that election in control of the programs of government. It does not want opposition parties, the DA on economy, the EFF on land reform, to drive the agenda and find itself on the back foot. It is therefore in this gesture trying to take both of those very key issues back into its control and to determine the direction in which change will happen. The risk it runs, of course, is that those details, the infrastructure projects that President Ramaphosa was talking about, may be linked to the 195 billion that he says comes out of China.
Yes.
And it may not actually deliver in the short term before that election, which is what many people are looking for. Changes in their lives every day on the ground in the very near future, as in tomorrow, the week after that. This is, after all, the period in which we have action in public about rise in fuel costs, rise in food prices, and other kinds of economic troubles.
Is this a dangerous? I'm not so sure if that would be the right word to use, but is this a risky statement to make, or a risky pronouncement to make, that it has to be made at night when market monitors are perhaps asleep and may not react immediately, and therefore you allow them some time for the message to sink in?
That world is a very old world that doesn't exist anymore. The world is alive and awake 24/7 with the information networks around and the financialization of capitalism. By this point, everybody will know. This may have been to cushion the shock so that people wake up tomorrow morning and don't go into the evening. So this might have a very local, specific audience in mind. I also think that people need to pay attention to the very detail of the statement, because it isn't as strong as many people would want it to be. It's a provisional statement that says that they will take this to Parliament and that they will propose it through the parliamentary network. This does not mean that it will necessarily pass. I mean, chances are it will pass, but that is a very long process. That's not a process of automatic implementation by the end of the year. Also, this cannot delay, or shall we say suspend, those very Vincent Smith hearings that you were talking about earlier.
Yes.
Those will have to be completed, and the democratic process around those will have to be respected. They may inform this particular proposal by the ANC, and the ANC's proposal may in turn inform that, but they're not mutually exclusive, and nor can the one cancel out the other.
Perhaps the fact that this decision is taken at Lekgotla level, where unlike, your 80-seater NEC, this is an extended session of ANC leadership involving all NEC members of other structures as well. Do you have a feeling that there could have been a push from the left within the ANC to get this pronouncement to be made as it did?
Let's not forget that this was actually proposed a year ago at the NEC, at the ANC's policy conference. It was then reaffirmed at the elective conference in December of 2017. And so we've seen a year since the policy proposal, we've seen 6-7 months since the elective conference. So it, I think, is an internal party process where people were seen to be, wanted to see action inside the party, particularly because there is a general election next year, and the ANC has great concerns that it does not want the municipal election results of 2016 replicated in 2019. It wants to go into the campaigning process with all of those agendas around jobs, economic renewal, as well as land reform on its terms. It does not want to be constantly responsive to the DA on jobs and unemployment or the EFF on issues of land reform. It wants to own the agenda. Whether it will successfully do this, that remains to be seen.
Well, Angelo, perhaps finally, before I let you go, do you think he has stolen the thunder here from the opposition?
As I said, I think that remains to be seen, because how South Africans react to this over the next few days, that will determine how South Africans read his statement. Because while his statement may have all sorts of provisional elements to it, we will hear details from Ace Magashule tomorrow, presumably, as the Secretary General of the ANC. And in the wake of that, we will have South Africans digest this in various spaces. The Section 25 hearings, we've heard from South Africans in their thousands what they believe. There are apparently just under 250,000 submissions to Parliament on land reform. Yeah. So how this plays out in the public will only be seen over the next few weeks. How it plays out for the ANC will definitely be seen in 2019, because there is also a trust deficit, and so I don't think voters are so easily swayed by words anymore. They're wanting to see actions. And so the pressure will be on the ANC to put action behind these words, and that could be where things may not go quite according to the script that they imagine it will, because it's not just the parliamentary process, it's also the international investor community that the ANC has been wooing through its government, and it's also its BRICS partners that it just spoke to last week about changing the way in which that 6% foreign direct investment between BRICS countries is increased while maintaining the partnerships that exist with the major trading partners. And so it's both the international community as well as the very domestic community that the ANC now has to placate, and that is a very big ask, as anybody could tell you.
Angelo Fick, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Well, that was political analyst Angelo Fick talking to us about the pronouncement that was made by President Cyril Ramaphosa of the decision that was taken by the ANC Lekgotla, where they're saying land expropriation without compensation is the way to go. Well, we'll see what happens. As Angelo said, that we'll be watching those developments going forward. Let's take